So I'm here in El Paso at a hotel, and I've been spending quite a bit of time in a hotel lately. I've taken 10 episodes of my Steampunk gear table, and which is probably around 5 hours of video, and knocked it down to 20 minutes, just a compilation. So I'm going to narrate it because I had to lose the soundtrack, otherwise it wouldn't have made sense. So I'm just going to narrate it, and hopefully it doesn't sound too boxy. But anyway, please enjoy the video, and thanks for watching.
There is nothing wrong with your television set. Do not attempt to adjust the picture. We are controlling transmission. If we wish to make it louder, we will bring up the volume. If we wish to make it softer, we will tune it to a whisper.
Well, here's a wood pile that the tarp was degraded, and so this is what I'm going to make the table out of, believe it or not. So here I'm mocking up some designs and making measurements to scale, in a miniature scale, and trying to figure out how big it's going to be. These are some of the tailings and some of the pieces that I cut to make the table out of, and then these are some scraps left over. Gonna try and get through this in one take here, 20 minutes. This is planing them out. The wood was still a little bit wet, which ended up biting me a little bit. I filled that bag 3 times. This is one of the first runs through the planer. I ended up with 3 bags, like I said, so it went into my compost pile. This is the miters. I was using my miter saw, but it wasn't giving me perfect cuts because the wood was so thick, and I thought, maybe I'll go do 5-sided, but I really eventually decided on 6-sided. I put them on the table saw. See, you can see the curve in it. And so I did it on the table saw. I made a little jig and recut them all and got a much tighter fit. Although the wood was still a little wet, so I had some shrinkage later. I'll show you, but here's just kind of mocking it up, and I put a center pin in. And then this is where the gears are going to be cut. So I had an inside and outside gear. And I made this template based on that design there. There I cut it out. And so now I'm going to draw the pieces on it and then start cutting them out. This was a test piece to make sure that I could get into all the corners and everything with the sander, because I didn't want rough edges, So the sanding took me forever. But that's what I was doing there. That was the first piece cut. Now once I put the gear face on there was no going back. This is all of them put together now. Not actually assembled, but just mocked up. And that's a sheet of aluminum 1/4-inch plate that I am going to use for the base of it, for the underside. And eventually I'm going to put gears on it, wooden gears that move. I cut out some cracks I had, and that ended up biting me in the butt later. And really what I should have done is used the bad side on top, but I didn't know what I was going to do later. This is how I attached them together initially. You've got these bolts. Half of it's a screw, half of it's a bolt, and so I'll show you how I did that. This is when I used to build staircases. These were a bunch of jigs that I had built myself to make the job go faster. That was for the end of a handrail, and this other one is for the base of a newel post, and this is for the face of a newel post. And I decided to use this one to get my alignment perfect for putting all these pieces together. So this is the small hole for the screw side of it, and you just screw them into the holes. And then the nut side, the bolt side, protrudes out. And then on the opposite piece, you lay it out, of course, and then you drill these relief holes where you can get a wrench in there, and a nut and a washer and a wrench. This is cutting the through hole that the bolt side will go through. It should slip through easily. It always seems to leave a little bit of a solid edge on it, so I clean them up by hand so I don't have any problem, you know, slipping the two pieces together. Then I put them in for a test fit. The whole thing gets test fit and bolted together. So I bolted it all up, and then I removed all of the bolts and did a glue up each piece individually. And I would put one coat of glue on, let it set for a little bit because it's end grain and it tends to soak up the wood. So I did a couple coats, and then I snugged them up. I put a piece of wood underneath it so the top would be flush, and just to make sure that, you know, everything flushed out and I had a flat surface when I was done. I guess I could have edited that a little more. Now this is what bit me in the ass later. I used, in the cracks, I thought I could fill them in with 5-minute epoxy. And you can see some of the wood is still wet, and that bit me also. But, you know, that's just my own foolishness there, and just wanted to get it done fast. But it was a long-term project. This is after a lot of sanding, and all of the edges are sanded, which that took days and days and days of backbreaking labor. Here's cutting the base of it. This is what's going to be the bottom side, and I've got a real special plan there. Okay, this is routing out. I made a little jig there for a little template for where I had to set the router up, and I routed all of that out so I could recess the base aluminum into the tabletop itself from the bottom. Could have edited a little more of that out too. What is going on here? I had a computer crash yesterday, and so hopefully this isn't going to bite me. This is the first time I've seen it going through. And here's my piece of aluminum sitting on there. Just test fit. And this is a sand job that I did on the top of it, just an initial sanding. Here's a piece of glass that I had cut. I think I'm going to have to recut it, but that's okay. Now I'm clamping it off, and I'm getting ready to put these, they're called elevator bolts in. And when they come brand new, they're really shiny, but I stuck them in a jar or in a pan with some vinegar in it, and so I wanted to dull them out a little bit. And this is the first countersink hole. There's 18 of these doggone bolts, and I wanted to make sure that they all fit perfectly, so I took it slowly. Now this is really cool stuff. This is a copper paint. It's actually metallic paint. We'll get back to that here in a second. These are the pieces that I bought for the legs. They're maple. And so here's the first template. I wanted to see how it would look, so I cut it out of some small stuff just to make a template. And that was my first leg design, and I really didn't like it. It kind of looked too octopusy instead of... So here's my bolts, and I stamped numbers in the top of them just to make it look like they went to something. And then on the left side, there's my new leg design, which I like a lot better. It looks a lot more sturdy as well, so I went with that. So here we go. I'm gonna antique this thing, and so the first thing I did is I sanded it down, roughed it up a little bit, and then cleaned it off real well. And then this is a primer coat, And I used this sponge so it gave it some texture to it. And then there's the real McCoy right there. That's the real copper. And so I think I did a time lapse here of applying the copper. Well, there's the first coat of copper. And then the second coat of copper I did the time lapse. These are the legs getting ready to glue them up together. They're going to be double wide there. And I biscuit jointed all of them as well. And here's that time lapse I was talking about. It's pretty time consuming, but it sure looks good. I mean, it was a really cool transformation from aluminum to copper, and I was really happy with the way it came out. Eventually what I'm going to do is in that center section, I'm going, oh, this is some spray. Now, this spray patinas the copper paint while it's still wet. So I sprayed it a few times, and this is a time lapse of it kicking off. And man, it just looks great. But that whole center is going to be gears. I'm going to cut wooden gears. There it is after it dried. So that whole center section is going to be gears. And I'm going to cut them out of wood, and it's going to be motorized. Here is the first leg, and it fits in, it nests into one of the gears. And that was a lot of work too, sanding those guys and everything. Of course, I broke a few bandsaw blades doing this project. It came out pretty decent though. I really was happy with the legs. And being that I put 3 legs on it, you don't have to level it. There's a broken bandsaw blade right there. I used really small blades, fine-tooth blades. And I made this little jig to hold it up so I could put this copper. This is the stuff that you hold down a water heater with. And there's a self-centering tab. Little, self-centers the holes so when you drill it out. So every hole, I drilled out every single hole and used aircraft rivets on every single one. It was very time consuming. A lot of rivets, a lot of drilling. I don't know how many hundreds of holes I drilled, but it was a lot. And then each one got a washer, because some of the holes, every other hole was large and every other one was small, so I put washers on them. There I'm laying them all out, putting them all in. And I got this really cool plunge router so I could do bow tie joints. I was starting to see some separation, and I wasn't sure that my miters were tight enough, so I wanted to secure it with bow ties. And there's another, that's part of the mistake right there, is you saw it, putting all that 5-minute epoxy on there. So I used a small one here because I didn't want to run into my bolts, and I used walnut, and you can see the gap I have there on the back side where the miter was. It kind of ticked me off a little bit. So, but that was a cool jig. So what you do is you only cut it down. You use the router to route down a certain distance, not all the way through the piece, and then you push it through the table saw to cut the bow tie out. This is kind of precarious. This thing got really, really heavy, and I was, of course, working by myself, and it's balancing on just a couple of those gears that are finely sanded, so I was really worried about this thing. So there it is, flipping it over, getting ready to do some bow ties on the front, I think, on the face side of it. Yep. Use double stick tape, stick the jig on there, get it good and tight. You don't want that thing to move at all. And this is also kind of precarious. So you plunge route, you push the router down into the wood, and then you spend quite a while cleaning out the entire bow tie area. And of course, because it's a round bit, the corners are rounded so you have to go in there with a chisel afterwards and just clean up some small areas and actually square the corners up. Yeah, there's some in the field there, that some little spots that were missed with the router, but easily cleaned up with a sharp chisel. And then here's the corners. You have to get right in there and clean out those corners, because your bow tie is going to have square corners on it, straight corners. So you don't really want to cut too far into it, because it'll show. You want a nice tight joint. And boy, this is the first time I ever did bow ties, and I really had fun doing it. It just looks beautiful when you finish, and strong too. Very, very strong joint. A lot of people put them on cracks. You know, if you have a big crack in a big piece of wood, put a bow tie joint in it. And I chose a different color wood because I really wanted the craftsmanship to show up. Now, I did have some miters that weren't exactly right, and so I cut those grooves in it that you saw to fill that in later. Here I'm readjusting it for this portion of it, for the bow tie itself. So, you know, basically, like I said, you don't cut all the way through the wood. You cut partially through it, and then you push it through the through the table saw, and you get it to where it's almost to drop out. Just take a knife and cut it the rest of the way out. Some of them dropped right out with just a little tiny piece left on there that I sanded off. And this is gluing up for the bow tie. I made sure that every little piece and surface was covered with glue. Wanted a really good tight joint. And then I did the bow tie also. Used the excess glue in the joint and then just tapped it in. Now that's all the way down, so there's going to be some sanding to do, but that'll give you a nice flush edge. And then I scraped off the glue while it was wet, because once that glue dries, if you try and sand it, you can gum up your sandpaper, and it's just a pain in the butt. So I make sure and get it all off when it's still wet. There's still a lot of sanding to be done, but now here's what I did. I had a bunch of cracks on the face, so I got my Fordham. I've done some jewelry work in the past, so I set up my Fordham drill, the Dremel deal. It's got a foot pedal on it, and I I removed the resin that I put in some of the cracks, some of the larger cracks, and I made them a little bit deeper and a little bit wider and whatnot. And I wish I would have done more, to be honest with you, because now I'm going to have to go back and redo some things. But, you know, it was kind of tedious, but it all works out in the end. It's craftsmanship. So here I am laying in turquoise into these cracks. And that was tedious as well, you know, I'm not going to lie. But these are the larger pieces. And I bought several different size grains of turquoise. So you inlay it as best you can. And then I got some really fine, and I sanded it off. Well, I had a scene where it showed super glue. It must be in this one. So anyway, the larger chunks were super glued in and then sanded down flush. And then I put in these smaller pieces to fill in a lot of those voids. Yeah, there it is. So here I'm super gluing it in, and it doesn't take much, just a couple little drops, and they're definitely locked in place. They're not going anywhere. It really just kind of spreads out. That super glue spreads out throughout the, you know, all the way around all the stones, the little pieces. So basically, Once I get this all glued in and dried, then I resand it. And it's just, man, it's beautiful. I got this off the internet for guys that were doing guitar faces that had cracks in it and whatnot. And here's a finished bow tie after sanding. There's some of the cracks that were finished after sanding. It really came out beautifully. I love it. It's great. And those little grooves that I cut in on either side of the bow tie there, those are going to get filled with some black stone. I didn't want to use more turquoise. I wanted to do something a little different, so I used some black stone in there. I don't know what it's called. I don't know much about stones, but onyx maybe or something. And I guess, see, that was just the testing the waters with turquoise, and I really didn't like it. I thought it would, you know, I've got those natural lines with the turquoise, and I didn't want a bunch of straight lines with turquoise. I think I wanted something darker that looked different. But you can see how beautiful it is, and then once I clear coated it later on, you'll see how beautiful it does look. So I had to put these bolts in, and now that I've got all those pilot hole or those, you know, recess holes built, I have to, you know, hold this on. So here I'm drilling a pilot hole, and it looks like it's not straight, but it was a straight hole. And here's the actual hole size. And because the oak is so hard, I had to do it in multiple stages. You know, you can't just drill straight through it. You want to get all that wood out of your bit. And this is going through the aluminum base right here. And of course, you got to clean it all up. I guess I could have sped this part of the video up too. Sorry about that, folks. But, you know, clean work surface is good, always good. You can see how that. Now, these not carriage bolts, these elevator bolts, they've got kind of a little bit of a crown on them. So you have to, you know, kind of cut the hole by hand a little bit, make sure they all fit. And they're all a little off center, so you have to find the right one that fits in the right hole. And here's all 18 of them all in and bolted in from the bottom and flushed out. They're all pretty flush. They're all definitely recessed. And this is the legs are on it now, and this is the first light coat of spar varnish. It's 70% spar varnish, 30% thinner. I just did a small coat, and there's a second light coat. Now you can see where there's the cracks that I filled with the 5-minute epoxy is shedding. It's forcing the spar varnish away. It's repelling it. So I'm going to have to go back later and redo that whole thing. You know, get in there and cut them out and do more inlays. And so we'll see how that turns out. But like I said, you know, it's a learning curve for me as well. But it sure is going to be beautiful, especially when, you know, you walk up to the table and it's going to move. All the gears will start moving. It'll be battery operated. Well, I hope you enjoyed the little short video. I say short, it actually ended up being long, but it was pretty compressed. So share it, like it, you know, thumbs up, all that good stuff, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye.